As crowds celebrated the end of World War II in 1945, a troubling reality crept in beneath the cheers. The defeat of Nazi Germany didn't bring about true peace. Instead, it merely changed the battleground. With Europe devastated and the Axis powers defeated, two superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union. One stood for capitalism and democracy, while the other represented communism and centralized power. Their partnership had always been precarious, and with Hitler's downfall, their stark ideological differences could no longer remain hidden. The seeds of a new conflict. The victory in World War II created a power vacuum, particularly in the ravaged landscapes of Europe and Asia. As the United States began providing economic aid to help rebuild Western Europe through the Marshall Plan, the Soviet Union focused on tightening its grip on Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary found themselves transformed into satellite states under Moscow's influence. This was more than just a conflict between nations, it was a battle of competing visions for the future. In response, the United States introduced the Truman Doctrine, committing to support free nations that were fighting against communist takeovers. What had started as a war against fascism was now evolving into a different struggle entirely, a Cold War. The Iron Curtain descends. By 1947, the former allies of World War II had turned into rivals. Winston Churchill famously warned of an Iron Curtain that had descended across Europe, marking the growing divide. Tensions heightened dramatically with the Berlin blockade in 1948, when the Soviet Union cut off access to West Berlin in an attempt to drive Allied forces out of the city. In response, the United States and Britain orchestrated an impressive airlift, delivering supplies to the city for nearly a year. This effort wasn't just about logistics, it was a clear statement of determination. In 1949, the United States and its allies established NATO, a military alliance designed to counter Soviet expansion. Not to be outdone, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact in 1955, uniting Eastern Bloc countries into a competing coalition. Europe had officially divided into two opposing military camps. The nuclear sword of Damocles. The most terrifying element of the Cold War was the arms race. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, ending America's brief nuclear monopoly. What followed was a global game of brinkmanship. Each side stockpiled thousands of warheads. The doctrine of mutual assured destruction meant that if either side launched a first strike, both would be annihilated. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world the closest it has ever come to nuclear war. American spy planes discovered Soviet missiles being installed in Cuba. For 13 days, the world held its breath. In the end, the Soviets backed down, and the crisis ended with a quiet agreement to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey. But the lesson was clear. The Cold War wasn't just cold. It could become very hot, very fast. Proxy wars, the Cold War turns violent. By the end of World War II in 1947, former allies had transformed into fierce rivals. Winston Churchill famously spoke of an Iron Curtain that had fallen across Europe, signifying the growing divide between East and West. Tensions escalated in 1948 with the Berlin blockade, when the Soviet Union cut off access to West Berlin, aiming to force the Allies out. The United States and Britain responded with a remarkable airlift, delivering essential supplies to the city for nearly a year, showcasing their resolve. In 1949, this commitment solidified with the formation of NATO, a military alliance formed by the United States and its allies to counter Soviet influence. In response, the Soviet Union solidified its own grip on Eastern Europe by creating the Warsaw Pact in 1955, bringing together the countries of the Eastern Bloc into a rival coalition. Europe had distinctly split into two opposing military camps. Although the superpowers never engaged in direct combat, they battled through proxy wars worldwide. In Korea, North and South collided ideologically, drawing in the US and China. The Korean War ended in a stalemate, which reinforced the division of the peninsula. In Vietnam, the US sent hundreds of thousands of troops to avert the spread of communism. After years of intense conflict, the U.S. withdrew, and Vietnam eventually unified under communist governance. Across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, the Cold War rivalries sparked coups, revolutions, and civil wars, leaving a lasting impact on global politics. The Cold War's end and its lasting legacy. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union found itself grappling with economic stagnation and rising discontent among its citizens. Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms known as glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, in an attempt to rejuvenate the nation. But these changes inadvertently led to its downfall. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the crumbling of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. Just a couple of years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially disbanded. However, the conclusion of the Cold War didn't erase its consequences. NATO began expanding into Eastern Europe, while former Soviet republics experienced significant political turmoil. The United States emerged as the undisputed superpower, but new challengers such as China began to rise in prominence. Perhaps the most concerning legacy of this era is the continued presence of nuclear weapons. More countries than ever before possess these arms, and the specter of nuclear conflict, which once defined the Cold War, continues to cast a shadow over global politics today. The enduring shadow. The world today still carries the weight of the Cold War. The alliances, borders, and rivalries that define our global order were forged in those tense decades. While the period brought remarkable advancements in technology, space exploration, and intelligence, it came at the expense of a pervasive sense of fear and uncertainty. Now, some observers caution that we may be sliding into a new Cold War, this time between the United States and China. Once again, we find ourselves in a contest for influence that spans technology, ideology, and economics. The nature of the weapons has changed, but the stakes feel hauntingly similar. So, can we truly say that World War II ended in 1945? Or did it simply transform into something more subtle, yet just as perilous? While the Cold War may have officially concluded, its influence continues to loom large, affecting us all in profound ways.